Good evening, everyone. I would like to call this meeting to order. As we get going on our agenda, I would like to reiterate our mandate, as I do in every meeting. The mandate of the Commission set out in the Washington State Redistricting Act is to accomplish state legislative and congressional redistricting in accordance with the Washington State Constitution. The bipartisan commission was created to listen to the public every 10 years so the districts should be drawn by statute and with public input. As the chair of the commission, I will articulate and manage the commission's process. In my role as chair, I will ensure the process is as participatory, fair, and equitable as possible. The bipartisan commissioners have the power and the responsibility to vote, ultimately creating and adopting a redistricting plan. Voting commissioners will make decisions that will create maps to best represent the interests of all Washingtonians. Those of you from the public who are joining us this evening, welcome. It's my goal to engage communities across Washington as fully as I can and to hear and address your concerns and requests. We will certainly deliberate on the issues where we have jurisdiction. Where we don't, I'll do my best to refer you to those who may be able to respond the most effectively. I want to review our purpose and values as I do at the beginning of every mission. The commissioners have agreed to an open, transparent, and credible process to provide access to everyone, to welcome all voices in a process that's grounded in the statute. The conduct of the commissioners is one of transparency. The commissioners have agreed to participate and negotiate in good faith and to collaborate and cooperate civilly and respectfully. And the outcome this commission is striving for is to meet our deadlines outlined by law, to produce the best possible maps, and to make sure that the outcomes are credible to everyone. As I do every meeting, I want to review the public input that we've received since our last meeting. It's my intention to reiterate what I've heard since March 8th. We received one communication requesting parity in the commission's relation to Indian tribes. We also received a request for equity in the commission's relation to Indian tribes. We have received one request for an explanation for how incarcerated individuals will be taken into account in the redistricting process. And we received a request asking for the commission to take action on a rigorous code of conduct in the interest of commission and legislative staff and the public. I would now like to call roll. Commissioner Joe Fain.
Present.
Commissioner Paul Graves.
Present.
Commissioner April Sims. And Commissioner Brady Walkinshaw.
Present.
Good to see you all. So as usual, I'll use an order that we've agreed on in advance to make sure everybody has the opportunity to speak first at some point. So the order this evening is Commissioner Walkinshaw, Commissioner Fain, Commissioner Sims, and Commissioner Graves, and we will rotate from there. And thank you. I'd now like to move to approve the meeting minutes for the meeting that we held on March 8, 2021.
Move adoption of the minutes.
Thank you. Second?
Second. Oh.
Any items for discussion or amendments? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, so we have approved the minutes. I would now like to introduce our panel for this evening from the United States Census. First, we're going to hear from Lorraine Ralston, and I'm just going to take this moment to introduce her. She's a senior partnership specialist for Washington with the U.S. Census Bureau. She began working for the 2020 census in late 2018 and was responsible for outreach in 18 counties throughout the state. Her job included working with local governments, nonprofit organizations, the business community, and other groups to promote the census and encourage participation. A resident of Pierce County, she's lived in Washington since 2004. So welcome, Lorraine. I would also like to take this opportunity to introduce James Whitehorn, who is the chief of the Census Redistricting and Voting Rights Data Office. where he manages the Redistricting Data program and the Section 203 language determinations required by the Voting Rights Act. He began his career at the U.S. Census Bureau as a geographer. In the Geography Division, working and eventually leading the effort on the geographic support to the Redistricting Data program. Before joining the Bureau in 2006, James worked on contract for 5 years at the Civil Rights Division at the U.S. Department of Justice as a Geographic Information Systems Specialist. James holds both a BS and a BA in Geography from the Pennsylvania State University. So welcome to you, James Whitehorn. We're glad that you're both here. At the end of both of these presentations, we will have a period of Q&A. So first, I'd like to welcome Ms. Ralston, if you would like to begin your presentation.
Great. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you so much, members of the commission, for inviting me here this evening to give you a little bit of information about the census. I just want to give you an overview of the outreach that we did here in the state of Washington and what some of our partners did throughout the state, and give you a little bit of some of the results that we got at the end. And then James will obviously go more in depth into the redistricting process. Next slide. So just to review, the mission of the Census Bureau is to count every person once, only once, and in the right place. Next slide. And what we do in the partnership program, sorry, Maria, next, yeah. And what we do in the partnership program or the outreach program is actually a threefold mission. Our job in outreach is to educate the population about the census so that they understand why we're doing it, why they need to be counted. We want to encourage people to self-respond, and I'm going to circle back to that a little bit later, why self-response is so important to us. And finally, in the outreach program, we really wanted to engage with organizations to help us reach those populations of people that are going to be a little bit harder to count for us, people who might not be motivated to participate in the census. We find that that local engagement really helps us make sure that people can get counted. Next slide. So our key message throughout the 2020 census was that it was very, very easy to be counted, that it was never easier to be counted. We offered 3 ways that people could be counted this time. They could go online to answer the census, they could call a toll-free number to answer the census, or they could complete a form that they might have received in the mail. So that was our key message that we and our partners tried to promote this last year. Next slide. Within the state of Washington, our partnership program really started in late 2018. We had a staff of about, varied from time to time, but generally speaking, there were about 25 of us working throughout the state to promote the census. There were 20 general partnership specialists, kind of jack of all trades. We worked with a variety of organizations. We had 4 people specifically working with the tribes in the state of Washington. We had 1 person who was our liaison with the congressional delegations, both at the state and the federal level. And we had 2 people that were working specifically with the media, that's traditional and non-traditional media. Next slide. At the end of our partnership program, our outreach program within the state, the 25 of us, engaged with more than 10,000 organizations across the state. That included government agencies, municipalities, nonprofit groups, the tribes, faith-based groups, the schools, and that schools from kindergarten through university, a variety of businesses and business trade organizations, and healthcare providers. We also established more than 50 complete count committees, and complete count committees are they're sort of our secret sauce with outreach. These were volunteer groups that came together within a community. Typically, they were established by the most senior government official in that area. So it might have been a county commissioner that pulled the group together, or a mayor. It included a variety of people from the community leaders, organizational leaders, nonprofit groups, business community, and they worked together with us to raise awareness about the census and help motivate people to answer the census. Next slide. So as I said, in Washington, we had more than 50 complete count committees. The state of Washington itself had a complete count committee that was convened by the governor. We had 28 counties that participated in complete count committees. Some of them established their own, some counties worked together. We had 10 tribes that created their own complete count committees. And then we had 13 other groups, affiliated groups that came together for their own groups. And the complete count committees were absolutely invaluable in the outreach that we did in the state, and really made a difference in encouraging people to participate in the census and to not be fearful about being counted in the census. Next slide. This just kind of gives you an overview of where those complete count committees were. You can see the different counties that participated in the program, the tribes that established their own complete count committees, and then just a few examples of those other groups that I was talking about. For example, the Filipino American group came together and created its own complete count committee to make sure every Filipino American in the state got counted. Next slide. At the state level, we had an incredible amount of support from the state government. As I said, Governor Inslee established the statewide complete count committee that kicked off in October of 2018. Former governor and former Secretary of the Commerce, Gary Locke, was the chair of that group. And the coordination of the complete count committee was done through the Office of Financial Management. There was also about $15 million approved by the state legislature to support outreach efforts here in the state of Washington. And OFM was responsible for the process where that money got out to the different complete count committees around the state, or any other organization that applied for funding to help with their outreach efforts. Next slide. And this just gives you an idea of some of the groups that participated at the state level. We had a variety of organizations that had a statewide reach. We had some representation from members of the legislature, and we also had some tribal representation on the statewide complete count committee. So next slide. So I just wanted to kind of give you a bit of a taste of some of the things that we and our partners did, those 10,000 organizations that put their hands up and said that they were happy to work with us to promote the 2020 census. So I'm not going to go through this in great detail, but I just really wanted to show you all some of the great work that was done. Next slide. So a lot of our partners created their own graphics, their own logos. We in the Census Bureau had our own toolkit of materials that can be used, but a lot of our partners took that toolkit and created their own look and feel. And there was a variety of things around the state that gave it kind of that local feel that made it people feel a part of the census in their community. Next slide. We also had a lot of printed materials that were created. Here's some examples. The example in the middle is a series of 5 ads that Jefferson County did that ran in their local newspaper, featuring 5 people from the county talking about how they use the census and why it's important to them. It was an incredibly effective campaign that they did in Jefferson County. Next slide. I have a few more examples of some of our printed materials. On the right is a full-page ad that was in the voter booklet that went out in 2019, again, encouraging people to answer the census. Next slide. We also had a lot of postcards and mailers that were created. And this particularly was a very effective way for our partners to reach the more rural parts of the state, states that didn't have as much access to the internet as we liked. We would have liked a lot of counties and cities develop their own postcards and mail them out to their residents, encouraging them to participate in the census. Excuse me, next slide. Just a few more examples here. We also had some libraries that sent postcards out. And it was just a great way to reach out and for people to get information directly from their local jurisdiction. Next slide. Social media was incredibly important for this census. Obviously, the pandemic hit us just as we were kicking off and getting ready to start counting people. We had to shut down a lot of our operations. Our partners had to, all of the plans that they had to do all these wonderful things, all of this outreach, they had to stop doing it. So social media became an important part of how we communicated. A lot of our partners created virtual backgrounds for Skype meetings, Zoom calls, things like that. Again, the postcards became invaluable as things got mailed out. Next slide. A few more examples of Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, everything was used on social media. Next slide. We also did a lot of webinars. We created a lot of videos. A lot of our partners, particularly our complete count committees, created their own websites with local information about how important the census was to their community and what their community stood to lose if not every person was counted. Next slide. Again, here's a few more examples of some of the websites that some of our counties created. Some of the libraries created their own websites with providing information about the census, the history around the census, and all of the information that is gleaned from the census, how it benefits the community. Next slide. We also had billboards and signage around the state. Hopefully some of you actually saw some of this if you weren't locked down completely in your homes. Again, it was unfortunate in the timing, but we had quite a few billboards. On the left, there was a great billboard in the Tacoma area. I think it was at the Emerald Queen Casino. We had big banners going up in some of our cities. Next slide. And some of our other partners put signs up on outside of their businesses, on their fences. The schools put things up. So we had a great amount of large signage out in the communities, encouraging people to get counted. Next slide. We also did a lot of meetings and presentations throughout the state. For the 2 and 3 years before the census, we did presentations. The Census Bureau, our partners did presentations. They did presentations in their language. We made sure that we had a lot of outreach in the languages that the people speak here in Washington to make sure that people understood why they needed to be counted and why it was important to their community. Next slide. We also did a lot of outreach to immigrant communities, refugee communities. We had Governor Locke was gracious enough to come speak at a lot of our kickoff meetings and was always willing to get out there in the community and encourage people to be part of the census. Next slide. We also had television interviews, we had rallies, we had lots of presentations to social groups, social clubs, Kiwanis clubs, Key clubs, Lions clubs, things like that. League of Women Voters was incredibly active, doing a series of town hall meetings throughout the state. Next slide. A lot of our partners created giveaways. We had some giveaways from the Census Bureau and our partners took it to the next level. We had customized shirts for different parts of the state of Washington. When we started distributing food around the state during the pandemic, a lot of our partners created bags that could be used and given away at the food distribution sites. Walmart gave a gift card as part of a raffle for one of our partners. The city of Renton did a raffle for a Walmart gift card. Next slide. And then also our tribes were very active as well. We had a lot of participation within the tribes. This is just some examples of the signage that went up. This is a billboard that the Cowlitz tribe had. I think they had 5 of these billboards along the I-5 corridor from Vancouver up to Tacoma. It was a very effective way to promote the census. Next slide. The tribes did a lot of raffles within their tribes. They gave a lot of giveaways. They had, as part of their canoe journey in 2019, we did a census event at that. So there was a lot of engagement with the tribes for this census. Next slide. We did a huge event at one of the Seahawks games. We had several booths promoting the census and giving materials away at one of the early games in January 2020, I believe. Next slide. We also had a very large program or event for partners from around the state. We had about 200 partners come to Seattle for kind of a workshop. It included our keynote speaker, the Lieutenant Governor, and also the Deputy Director of the Census. And we had lots of representatives of different groups, different populations of people in the state, talking again about how important the census was. And
So it appears that Ms. Ralston is frozen. Is that what others see? Yeah, so it's not me that's
Yeah, I
frozen.
thought maybe it was me.
Right. Okay.
She might just need to leave and come back. This does happen sometimes in committee meetings.
So let's just take a short break while she's able to log off and come back in.
sorry about that. I'm sorry about that. I'm back.
Great. So Maria, yeah, thank you.
I apologize. I lost my connection here. Okay, I'm going to keep going. So sorry. Okay, next slide. And I just wanted to, yeah, you don't need to show that. Next slide, Maria. Thank you. I just wanted to highlight two of our partners that did so much above and beyond. Washington Nonprofits is a large group throughout the state, created a lot of materials that they gave away for free in multiple languages. If you go around the state, you saw their posters everywhere. Next slide. And also the Tacoma Refugee Choir wrote and produced a video promoting the census. We're not going to show the video tonight, but I encourage you to go back and watch this at another time. It's an incredible video. It's an original song that they recorded in Tacoma. Next slide. So I just want to highlight some of our results that we got from the census. Next slide after that, Maria. So I'm only talking about the self-response rate. If you remember at the beginning, I said one of our missions with partnership was to encourage people to self-respond. We wanted people to answer the census on their own, so we wouldn't have to spend money to send somebody to their home to get them to answer the census. So that was one of the measures that we were very interested with concerning outreach. So the state of Washington actually finished #2 in the entire country with respect to self-response. As you can see there, we had 72.4% of the households in the state actually answered the census on their own, which was wonderful. If you can go to the next slide, Maria. In 2010, the self-response rate in the state of Washington was 67.2%. So we increased that by 5.2%. This again is the number of households that answered the census without someone having to come to their home to get that information. So we were really proud of this result. I think considering all of the challenges we had last year with the pandemic, this was just amazing. And it was directly responsible, directly a result of the support we had with our partners. Next slide. With respect to the counties, we had 25 of our counties surpass their 2010 final self-response rate. So about 64% of the state exceeded the rate of self-response that they had from the 2010 census. Again, this was an incredible result. The average increase for the counties was 5.19%. Next slide. This is just a list of those 25 counties that increased their self-response rates. You can go to the next slide and you can see what their final rates were in 2020 compared to 2010 and what their increase was. The top 10 counties in the state that increased their self-response rate over 2010 are listed here. As you can see, Jefferson County just knocked it out of the park. They had an increase of 10.7%, which is amazing. All of these counties had a complete count committee of some sort. Some were very formalized and met regularly and had websites and things like that. Others were a little bit looser organizations, but all 10 of these counties had some sort of a complete count committee. And I think this directly shows how effective those complete count committees were in helping us to get people to self-respond. Next slide. I just want to give you a little bit of information about the tribes. I'm not an expert on the tribes. And as I mentioned to Sarah on the phone, if you all would like more information about the tribes, we can have somebody, one of my colleagues, speak to you at a future date about that. But the tribes in Washington also did an amazing job with their self-response rates. The final rate was 73.8%. The tribes in Washington had the highest tribal self-response rate for any state in the country. So we are really, really proud of the engagement that we had with the tribes. Next slide. The top 3 tribes that had self-response rates that were the highest is the Port Gamble-Sklallam tribe, the Upper Skagit tribe, and the Puyallup tribes. Those 3 tribes did had the highest self-response rates this year, and we're really proud of that. I'm going to end it there. As I said, next slide, Maria. I'm happy to take questions after James' presentation, and I've put my colleague Jessica Imoche's information there. She is our tribal and congressional expert, and if you had any specific questions about tribal engagement or issues with the tribes or our congressional outreach, Jessica would be more than happy to speak with you at a later date. I'm very sorry for my technical problems on my end, but I'm going to turn it over to James now.
Thank you, Ms. Ralston. We appreciate your presentation, and we'll be asking you questions here shortly. So Mr. Whitehorn, if you would like to begin your presentation.
Certainly, thank you. Go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to talk more about the redistricting data program and the redistricting data that you can expect from the Census Bureau to help you with your work in actually conducting redistricting. But I always want to start, there's often a misconception or a conflation between what apportionment data and redistricting data are. So the apportionment data, which is the first data that comes out of the decennial census, is reported, but it's only reported at the state level. So the largest and smallest geography you see there is the state. This is just state population totals. And in that, we have 2 counts. We have the resident population, and then we have this federally affiliated count overseas. That's a group of people that are living overseas in service, usually to the federal government in one form or another. The majority are military, and they're counted for their resident state in which they belong for the purposes of apportionment. The numbers that are reported for that are the total population only. We report that as enumerated, so there's no disclosure avoidance other than the aggregation of that data to the state level, which is a type of disclosure avoidance in its own right. And this decade, we're saying that we will be able to produce that data by April 30th of 2021. The dates I'm announcing are not what our statutory deadlines are. They're the dates that we've been able to establish our ability to create this data. And so they don't align with those statutory dates. The redistricting data is the data set that gives you the detail that you need to do redistricting. It does have state level as the largest level, but it goes all the way down to the individual census block. And if you're not familiar with census geography, the census block is the smallest piece of geography for which the census calculates data and publishes it. And it's we consider it the Legos because every other piece of geography that census reports data for can be created out of these census blocks. And it's a wall-to-wall coverage, so you have complete coverage of your state or any other area that you want to look at. In this data, we only report the resident population, the people who are actually living within the state. but we report the characteristics that are needed for redistricting, especially in regards to protecting voting rights. So race, ethnicity, and then we have some select housing characteristics included as well. This decade, this is being protected by what we call differential privacy through our specifically the top-down algorithm. This is a data protection mechanism that allows us to introduce noise into the data while still making sure that the data is fit for use for the needs for which it's designed. We've currently announced a date of September 30th of 2021 for when we believe we'll be able to get this data out to all the states. And I do have a late breaking announcement, but I'm going to save that to a little bit later about something that'll come a little earlier that may still be of use. So we switch to the second slide. So a little bit about the Redistricting Data program itself. That's the program that my office manages. And there's a law on the books called Public Law 94-171, and it tells the Census Bureau to provide the states with an opportunity to identify the small area geography that they need to conduct legislative redistricting. So historically, that has been those blocks that I mentioned, and then also voting districts, precincts, or wards. If a state chose to participate in that part of the program, it's completely voluntary. So we worked for several years before the census. We established a nonpartisan liaison or liaisons in each state. We do that by reaching out to the legislative leadership in both chambers of the state government and get them to identify the person or persons they want to represent the state in a nonpartisan manner for the purposes of the program. And then we work with them throughout the course of the decade. Nick Ferris in the Secretary of State's office is the person we worked with in Washington State to do that geographic exchange. Next slide. So the products that you can expect to receive that are the official products or data products from the 2020 census. The first thing that we have is what we call the geographic support products. These are the things like the shape files, those files for a geographic information system that will allow you to build a digital cartography, to build a map, and then to be able to manipulate that map to draw lines, move certain geography across into a different district, and see how that changes the population totals for districts as you're designing them. But then we also have paper maps. These are county maps, county block maps, where they have a series of maps for every county that shows the detail at a high enough scale that you can see every block within the county clearly labeled. We have state legislative district with voting district maps. These are done at the state legislative district, so you can have a better understanding of the relationship between the precincts and the state legislative districts. Census tract maps, which is a larger than block geography, but is a good statistical geography to look at, and then school district maps. So we have all of those that are provided as PDF format, which can be printed out on plotters. We have block assignment files. These are a listing of all the census blocks in the state and then the associated geography. So if you're looking at the place block assignment file, it has all the blocks in the state, and then in another column, it has the code for every place for the place that each block is associated with. If there is no place associated with that block, it leaves that field blank. These are very helpful when you're building a database if you're trying to use it to just crunch numbers. So you can have the block level data associated to this block file and be able to calculate the data for all of those other geographies. And then we have a crosswalk file, which crosswalks our 2010 blocks to the 2020 blocks. Many people don't realize we remove the blocks each decade and regenerate them. And so there's not a one-to-one relationship there. So this gives you that ability to crosswalk between the two if you have to look at something for the purposes of retrogression. Next slide, please. So in the shape files, we provide a lot of shape files. This is a listing of the full package of those files. We have some or many that are state-based, meaning that when you open the file in a geographic information system, it's going to have all of that geography for the entire state. You'll see that we also have some that are county-based, and you'll see that there's some duplication. It's the same data. We just have it broken up so that if you're the state, you don't have to grab individual county files and pull them all together. Or if you're a locality, you only have to pull in the county or counties in which your data is contained, so you don't have to work with the huge statewide data set. Next slide, please. We can have the maps. It's just an example of the maps. This is also on the right-hand side, you'll see is an example of the block assignment file. Those come with something also called a name lookup table. You can join the name lookup table to get the English language name instead of just looking at the code for the geography you're interested. So this is from our 2018 end-to-end census test, which was done in Providence, Rhode Island. And you can see that these blocks are all associated with this county subdivision, which is the township of Providence City. And we can link that based on that 5,900 or 59,000 number there. Next slide. With the data, this is what really people are interested in. They really want to know about the data and when that data is going to come. I mentioned we have the September 30th date for our user-friendly products that we'll be providing. And this is what you can expect to see. If you worked with 2010 census data, this should look very familiar. These first 5 tables, the P1 on race, P2 for race for the population 18 and over or voting age population, Hispanic or Latino or not Hispanic or Latino by race, and then the same for the voting age population, and then the housing unit count table with an occupied vacant status for the housing units. This is exactly the same as what we provided in 2010, the same format, the same categories, there's all the same. Table P5, this group quarters population by group quarters type is new this decade. We added this to help states who have the obligation to move certain group quarters populations to an alternate address. So group quarters in census language is things like correctional institutions for adults, nursing facilities, college university students, military quarters. And many states now have an obligation to modify the census data that they receive to move people, the majority of states that do this do it for prisoners, and they move them from the prison back to a previously known address. So the idea of including this table was to help people who have to do that work to know what census block that group quarter is in and how many people are in that group quarter. The group quarter table only has total population. It doesn't have it broken out by characteristics, but it's going to be included in the redistricting data set this time for the first time since its creation. Next slide, please. Oh, and all those tables are available at the census block level. So that goes all the way down to that smallest piece of geography that I mentioned. And this is what you can see when you open one up. This is an example of the race table. The universe is the total population. So we're looking at everyone that was counted. And then on a census form, people can select one or more races. And there's 6 total race possible combinations. So if someone selects a single race, they'll end up in population of one race, and they'll end up in whichever category they selected as that category alone. If they selected 2 races, they would then end up in the 2 or more races, and then they would end up with the combination of the 2 choices that they had made. And that goes all the way through to 6 possible permutations. So this table will extend with all possible combinations, so you have that available to you. The version of this table for the race for the population 18 and over does the same thing, except we just swap out the universe to be only those people who are 18 years and over out of the total population. Next slide, please. When we look at this table for the Hispanic or Latino or not Hispanic or Latino by race, it's very similar. Anyone who said that they're Hispanic or Latino, which in federal statistics is an ethnicity, is not a race, which is why this is done separately. If someone says they're Hispanic or Latino, they end up in that Hispanic or Latino group. If they said they were not Hispanic or Latino, then they are iterated through their selections of how they selected their race combinations. And then, of course, for the voting age version of this, we just do the same thing where we swap out the universe from total population to be the total population that's voting age before we pull the numbers. Next slide, please. So the housing unit table, very simple, total number of housing units in a block, and then the breakdown of the number of those that were considered occupied and the number that were considered vacant by the Census Bureau. And then for the group quarters population by group quarters type, the total population that's in group quarters, and then that's broken out by institutionalized, non-institutionalized, and then by the categories of these 7 major group quarters types. Next slide. So now with the delay of the redistricting data from the 2020 census, one of the things I wanted to point out was some things that are currently available. And one is the geographic support products that I mentioned earlier. those have already been posted for all states. So this has been available. We started posting them on the 22nd of January of this year, and we got the last states up on February 12th. So that full suite of products that I mentioned is all available for anyone to grab off the internet and work with. We also have what we call prototype redistricting data. When we ran our 2018 end-to-end census test in Providence, Rhode Island, as part of that test, we created redistricting products, both the geography and the tabulations that people can expect to see from the 2020 census. And so these are designed so people can work with them to build redistricting software, build databases. It has the schema and the fields that can be expected. And so we have this data, and it's also posted to our website, and that's available now as well. We have something called the Census Geocoding service. This is specifically geared for states who have that obligation to move people to a prior address and adjust the data before they do their redistricting. This Census Geocoding service is available all the time to the public. It allows up to 10,000 addresses to be geocoded at any given time through the web. But for states who obviously may have a larger population than 10,000, we've made a special file handling process where they can send that file to my office through a secure web incoming module, we call it. And we'll take that file and we'll run that file against the same geocoder, but we can do it on the inside where we can go up to 50,000 addresses at a time. You don't have to deal with the TCP IP internet traffic, so we're able to bump up the upper threshold of the number of addresses that can be run. And then what we do is we take that file and we return it to the state through another secure email service. There are some restrictions here. We aren't allowed to format the data for you. We aren't allowed to manipulate the data that we get back. We just have to take what you give us and put it against the geocoder and then give you the results. And there's a reason for that. It's if we were to start to manipulate those addresses, we would run afoul of our Title 13 requirement to protect that data, and we wouldn't be able to provide anything back to you. So we do ask that you do the formatting and provide the files to us, but we'll be happy to run them against our geocoding service for you if that's what you need. In addition, although it's not yet available, I think this is where I'll throw in the news that came out today. So the Census Bureau has been looking to try to find ways that we can reduce the impact of the delay on the states. And one of the things that we found when we looked really hard at our schedule was that our legacy format summary files, which are a data product that we've produced for the last several decades, but we always call them as for expert users because they are a little complicated to work with. They're basically the tables that would go into a relational database that then need to be joined together, and then queries have to be made to sort of pull out specific geography and specific data. But we are able to make those available earlier than this September 30th date. We think in mid to late August, we will have those. These are the same data that people will receive in September, but they're just not user-friendly. They're not as user-friendly, so it'll be a little more work, but it will provide the full set of data that people can expect from the 2020 census for redistricting. It has all of the different levels of geography. It has all of the tables, and it will be the same data that will come out in September 30th, although in a more user-friendly format at that time. But so that was something that we put out a notice today on the Census News Service, and we also provided a notice to all of our redistricting data program liaisons, those nonpartisan liaisons I mentioned. So that word is just getting out today. So something that may be useful and may be able to help provide a little bit more breathing room to states that are being impacted by the delay in our ability to deliver the data. Next slide, please. So also while people are waiting for the data, some things they can do is look at other data sets just to try to get a better understanding of the communities that they're going to be working in. Here's a couple data sets that I just wanted to point out. We of course have our American Community Survey. That's the survey which replaced the census long form. It's now a continuous survey, so we refresh the data every year. The American Community Survey 1-year estimates, the latest were published in September of 2020, and that's the 2019 1-year estimates. These are helpful for understanding large areas. They're good for the whole state, to understand the whole state numbers, congressional districts, and then counties and cities that are 65,000 or more people. So the drawback here is that if it's a small area, you're not going to have numbers in the 1-year estimates because in order to have enough sample and be able to produce something that's statistically valid, we have to keep it to larger areas. But then if you need small areas, we have the American Community Survey 5-year estimates. The latest was published in December of 2020. This comes from the 2015 to 2019 5-year estimates because we collect data for 5 years and we combine that data and then we make the estimates from that data set. The benefit of this is that we have small area geography. It always goes down to the block group geography, which is a collection of blocks. So it's not the very smallest blocks. That's the next step up in the geographic hierarchy. But this collection of blocks we provide data for, and that is a wall-to-wall coverage. So you don't have to worry about holes in the data as you would if you were looking at something that had a 65,000 person threshold. The drawback is of course, it's not as overall as current because you're collecting data over multiple years as opposed to just the preceding year. But those data sets are both available, and there's some links that would guide you to them. Next slide, please. And we also have something called the population estimates. This comes from a different program. This is not part of the 2020 census. And what they do is they use demographic change to be able to update population estimates for cities and counties and townships and states. And these will be published in May for total population for several of these geographic levels. And then in June, they will have a republication where they'll also include some of the characteristics that are needed for redistricting. These are, of course, estimates, but they can give you an idea of sort of your county and city population totals, so you can get a better picture of a current picture of the population numbers that you'll be dealing with. These are referenced to July 1st of 2020, so very close to Census Day, only about 3 months apart, and can be a good sort of first draft look at the areas that you're going to have to work with. Next slide, please. So how is this data going to get out from the Census Bureau? So the official data, the easier to use data that's expected by September 30th, will have an official delivery process. We'll send this data to the governors and the legislative leadership in every state. We'll get a contact from your commission, whoever the chairperson is. We'll get an address and some contact information, and we'll make sure that they're included as an official recipient. And we will mail a physical media DVD and flash drive. They'll have the same data on them, but they're just 2 different ways because some people don't have DVDs and some people don't have USB drives. This embargoed access to data.census.gov, that was part of our original plan. I think we're going to reevaluate that since we're putting out the legacy format summary files in August, and that data will have already been out in the public arena. We may do away with this embargo, but our original plan was to have a 24-hour embargo where the official recipients could look at that data before it went public. And we would have confirmed the receipt of that data. And then next slide, please. The next day we'd release it to the public. So this would go through our primary data dissemination tool that we have at the Census Bureau. This is the Census Data Explorer at data.census.gov. This has a full suite of functionality. We've increased our data download size so that someone can go in and request all the blocks within a state for all the tables and the redistricting data and get it with a single data download poll. That wasn't something that was available in our previous tool, the American Fact Finder. So that was something that we scaled up specifically to assist with redistricting. We'll also have what we call the FTP expert users data. This is the data I was talking about a minute ago. It is, again, the full redistricting data summary file. It's these tables that you, as I mentioned, there's 4 tables that you have to bring into a database, link them together on a common field, and then do your subqueries to pull out the data. It sounds more intimidating than it is, but it does require a little special handling to be able to work with. Next slide, please. And then where can you get this information? So my office tries to maintain our website as sort of a clearinghouse for redistricting data and related information at the Census Bureau. The prototype data that we've already published, we did that as part of phase 3 of the Redistricting Data program. So you'll see that there's a link there for Redistricting Data Program Management. And that's where we have the links to the prototype data. Then above that, we have a decennial census redistricting data summary files. That's where we're posting the official data. So there's links to all the geographic products that I've mentioned. And then you also see there's this gray bar on the left where it says voting rights. If you want to access the Section 203 language determinations or the citizen voting age population by race and ethnicity tabulation that we've been producing for the last 10 years at the request of the Department of Justice for the voting rights enforcement, those are both available through that voting rights tab. And all of this can be reached by going to census.gov/RDO, which is my office's website. Next page, please. And with that, I just thank you for the opportunity to speak with you, and I look forward to taking some questions.
Thank you, Mr. Whitehorn. And so I now want to ask the commissioners, what questions do you have for Ms. Ralston and Mr. Whitehorn? So Commissioner Fain.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Really appreciate the presentation by both parties. I'm grateful to Ms. Ralston's work over the last few years getting all of those partnerships up and going. That seems like a mammoth undertaking. My question is for Mr. Whitehorn, and specifically about the data set that you said might be available at the end of August. I'm just trying to figure out how practically useful that data will be. Is that something that you expect that our data team will be able to parse into a usable import for our redistricting software so that we can really start drawing those maps at that time? Or is there some limitation to that data that will require us to wait until September?
I would expect that if you have someone who knows how to work with just sort of basic database type functionality, they should be able to handle it pretty easily. It's not complicated. It's just not a skill set that most people have. But if they have access to a database that can hold it and they understand how to link the files together, it should be fairly easy for them to do. And it is the full data set. It's the same data that's coming later. It's just in this slightly harder to use format.
What is the reason for an additional month to, if we should have somebody on staff that's capable of translating that data, why the additional month for the Census Department?
So that time is being taken to take those files that we're going to release. They're the input files for creating our DVDs that we will provide, which have a custom browsing software. So we have to convert those files to a new format, apply that browsing software, then we have to test that software. And at the same time, we're then loading the API, or application programming interface data set into our web-based system, throwing that in with the metadata to make sure that when people are making queries that they're pulling up the correct tables, the correct fields. So it's really that product creation, review, testing, and then deployment is what's taking up that extra time.
Thank you. So next I saw Commissioner Graves, followed by Commissioner Sims. Those are the hands I saw. So Commissioner Graves.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thanks again to the two of you for giving us such a thorough presentation here. I, like probably a lot of us on this commission, have heard plenty of questions about why we have such a long delay in getting the data until September 30th. Why are we having that delay? So the bulk of the delay is coming from the delays that we experienced in the census from COVID-19. The Census Bureau had to shut down our field activities almost immediately after we began self-response in late March. We were able to start getting those activities open again in a few handfuls of areas as we were paying attention to the health and safety guidance we were getting from governors and counties around the country.
and getting PPE out to our people and getting them trained on how to use PPE and how to respond in a proper manner and deal with other people when they were doing their work. But there are some other things as well. In our urgency to meet our constitutional requirement to get apportionment out, and with the timing of the ending of collection, the way it happened, we separated some processing activities that we would normally do together in a typical census without any kind of delays. We would have done these processing activities together. And so once we finished creating what's called the, without getting into a bunch of jargon, it's just the final input file into creating apportionment. We will actually have to then take that file. So we need to wait for apportionment to finish its processing. Then we get that file. Then we have to revisit some of those processing steps to make sure that we get all of the records, not just at the state level, but down into the individual block geography that I talked about. Then we go through a series of processing where we make sure that all the, because remember with the apportionment, we only need total pop and we only need it for the state. We have to go through a series of what's called editing and imputation, where we fill in missing holes for item non-response, or if there's the unintelligible response. We have to validate the data to make sure that it says something like, I was born in 1970, but I'm 5 years old. We have to resolve that. Make sure that it's a valid data set. And then once we have a complete data set, we have to apply our disclosure avoidance process. And then we have to go to our tabulation process, tabulate the data, check it before we can release it. And that's where we get to that August date. And then we transform that into something that's user-friendly, is that last piece of the chain there.
Thank you. Commissioner Sims, and then I also saw Commissioner Fain, you had your hand up again. So Commissioner Sims.
Yeah, so no small amount of work goes into this. Thank you, Mr. Whitehorn and Mrs. Ralston, for your presentation tonight. My question, I think, is for you, Mr. Whitehorn, and that is that there have been concerns that the bias in the data and differential privacy methods make communities with similar characteristics, racial characteristics, more dispersed geographically. And I'm wondering, how would you respond to those concerns on whether differential privacy would hinder our ability to comply with Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act?
So we have been working very hard on the redistricting and the voting rights use case for the differential privacy mechanism. The data that's been released so far, so what people have been analyzing so far comes from what we call PPMFs, or privacy protected microdata files. We've been releasing these as demonstration data sets periodically as we make progress on the disclosure avoidance system that we're building. And one of the things we did, or decisions we made, was we used what's called a small privacy loss budget, and we kept it constant for each of our demonstration data sets, because what we wanted to show was that we were improving the algorithms. We weren't just sort of putting our thumb on the scale by adding more and more privacy loss budget to make it more accurate. Now that we've gone through that process and we've got all of the characteristics well controlled, and we know that we can apply the privacy loss budget in a very targeted fashion, we're doing hundreds of experiments at the moment. I believe they said they're at 400 at the last count, where they're looking at how they can push accuracy down into the small geography that's needed. So now they've got at areas that are any accumulation of blocks of about a 500 person population, now we'll have a statistical guarantee around the proportion of the largest minority group within that area. So the idea being that this is when you're building a Section 2 case, it's based on the proportions of the populations that are within there, and of course several other things about racially polarized voting and a lot of other issues that go into that. But making sure that the data set reflects the population and is accurate. The difficulty is trying to make sure we do that in a way that any random accumulation of blocks can be done, but they've cracked that issue. And so what we're going to do is put out by the end of next month a new demonstration data set that's going to be very close to our production parameters, and we're going to commit to keeping open a comment period for 4 weeks after that data comes out, so people can again analyze the data and give us feedback and tell us whether they believe that this is meeting the need for those cases. So a lot of attention is going into that. So thank you for that.
Okay, before I return to you, Commissioner Fain, I want to give you, Commissioner Walkinshaw, an opportunity to ask a question since you haven't had a chance yet. Do you have a question?
Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you both for your presentation. That was fabulous and comprehensive. James, Mr. Whitehorn, I was wondering, could you clarify perhaps the process for the kind of the incarcerated individual reallocation that you're describing, and sort of maybe describe for us what states need to do to get that process going?
So I think it's different in each state. It's not, from the Census Bureau's viewpoint, it's a state responsibility because it's not equally shared. It's not an equally shared responsibility of all states. So in 2010, New York and Maryland and Delaware were supposed to do that work. Delaware then passed subsequent legislation to push to 2020. But since then, there have been a lot of states that have been added to it. I think your state is one, but also California, Nevada. I'm going to miss several if I try to rattle them off. But essentially, what they're doing, what most states that I've talked to are doing, is they're getting records from the Department of Corrections that have the prison location for the incarcerated individual and has their previously known address, and they go through a process of geocoding that address, where they identify where is that address as far as the geography that I was talking about, and then they would have to create a separate file that would sort of be the pluses and minuses. So you'd have minuses from where the prison is and pluses to these blocks around the state where the folks are being moved to. And then when the census data comes out, you could apply those pluses and minuses to that data. So that's a sort of a rough description. Each state, though, has its own criteria. Lots of things come up. What if the person's from out of state? And what if previous address is out of state? What if the intake address isn't illegible, or there's no address there anymore? Or so that there's a lot of considerations that have to go into that process as well.
Thank you. So I'm going to return to you, Commissioner Fain. I think you had an additional question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Actually, I had two additional questions, and the first one was the one that April asked, and the second one was the one that Brady asked. But I'm going to follow up on the one from Commissioner Walkinshaw, which is you kind of opened the door there. So how is it handled when someone is incarcerated whose previous address was out of state? Not that makes a huge difference. I'm just curious. And then secondly, are we receiving just count data for that reapportionment or for incarcerated populations, or do we receive demographic data as well?
So the table that we'll provide, I'll answer the second question first. The table that we'll provide is going to be total population only. But if you look at the block population count, it will have the demographics there. So you'll be able to tell how many people were in the group quarter, and you'll be able to tell, and if the numbers are equal in the block, then and you don't have anyone else living there, then you know that's the same thing. I'm sorry, could you repeat your first part of your question?
Oh, the example that you provided about an individual whose previous address.
Good, yeah, I'm sorry. So that's really something that has to be decided by the person who's conducting the operation of making this adjustment table or figuring out how to move these populations back. I can say that some states will say something like, well, if the person's previous address was out of state, we leave them at the prison. If others say, well, if the person was from out of state, we remove them entirely from the count. The state of Maryland, which actually had to go all the way to the Supreme Court to defend their work with this type of prisoner adjustment, in talking to them afterwards, what they said was what really saved them was they came up with their decision tree before they moved a single person. They looked at all the possible situations and they said, okay, if this happens, we're going to handle it this way. So that the way they never got slapped with the arbitrary and capricious. They just had a system of rules that they were going to go through, and they applied them. And they believe that was why they won their case at the Supreme Court.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Sims, I think I saw your hand next. Well, you're on mute.
I lowered a year in and I still don't have the you're on mute thing down yet. I have a couple of questions. One is, how is the Census Bureau accounting for university populations, considering many students were not on campus in April due to COVID? And then I've got a few, but I won't hit you with them all at once.
Okay, so this is not my area of expertise, but I have been asked this question before and prepared some answers. Essentially, we just did a lot of extra work. We reached out to the universities and got as much information as they were willing to share about off-campus students. We prioritized when we got a response, a census response that said someone had a usual home elsewhere, and they said it was someone of a student age that was the person who had a usual home elsewhere listed on the form. We prioritized our call follow-up program with that. We did get numbers from the universities for people within the dorms and what their dorm counts should be. There was a lot of attention that was paid to it, and it's not something that I can address really authoritatively, but I know that it was actually one of the very first issues that was identified almost immediately when we had to suspend some field operations because the students were all going home right at the same time as we were starting the collection. And so I know that there's been a lot of attention paid to that, to both deduplicate students from, if they're being reported in their parents' house and we're seeing them also being reported at their student house, and also for making sure that we got the counts and as much information from other sources as we could.
All right, I appreciate that. And so along those same lines with the impacts of COVID, are there other ways that you're remedying undercounts in hard to reach populations?
So at the moment, we're working to make sure that the data that we've received is being properly processed. When you say remedy undercounts, that strikes as something like adjustment, which I think is something the Census Bureau is prohibited from doing. But making sure that everyone that we've received a response for is properly accounted for in the census processing is what we're doing at the moment.
Okay, thank you. And then my last, I don't want to take up all the Q&A time if my fellow commissioners have questions, but I think my last question is, I know that the Census Bureau is currently facing some legal challenges related to the data release timeline and the differential privacy methods. And I'm just wondering if you can share with us how the Bureau is addressing this issue.
I think I'm supposed to say that we're not, we don't comment on pending litigation. My apologies.
Fair enough. No, that's okay. I don't mean to put you in a tight spot. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Other questions? What other questions do you have? All right. I want to thank you, the members of our panel, James Whitehorn and Lorraine Ralston, for coming and presenting to us. This is really important information. I know we have a lot to unpack here. I also want to thank you for sharing your presentations in advance so we could post those with our meeting packet so the public would also have access to those presentations. And so those will be available on our redistricting website, just so you know that. And thank you very much for your time. We sure appreciate it. And I'm sure we'll be in touch with you. Thank you. I look forward to a strong relationship moving forward.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Have a great evening. All right, I now want to move into the period for public comment. There will be a public comment period today of 15 minutes. I will call your name in groups of 3, at which time your status in Zoom will change from observer to panelist. So when that happens, don't panic. There's typically a few seconds where it feels like you might be dropped. You're not being dropped. You're just being transitioned so that you'll be able to speak. And so when it's your turn, I'll call your name and you will have 2 minutes to speak this evening. At the end of your allotted time, you will be muted. So we realize that 2 minutes is a very brief time in which to share your comments. We're interested in what you have to say, and we urge you to send your written comments to us via the following email, address, which is comment@redistricting.wa.gov. So please feel free to share or to send in your written response as well. So I am now looking at the folks who are here to provide comment, and I'm going to start with Toller Brian, Christopher Pond, and Clarence Gunn. So those are the first three names. So Toller, if you are ready to share with us, we are ready to hear your comments.
Was that for me, Toller Brian?
That's right. Go ahead, sir. We're listening.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for this opportunity. My name is Toller Brian. I'm the district leader for District 9 in Spokane County. And I basically have a question, and as well as, well, actually two questions. One is, how do we find out, or what is going to be the process for us to know what's going on with District 9? I've heard a lot of, scuttlebutt, as you would call it, and I just don't know exactly, when and where and how that's going to all come to pass as to what's going to happen with District 9, especially as it relates to Spokane County. Secondly, I would have liked to have been asked one of the last panelists from the Census Bureau, what happens when somebody's not a resident of Washington, but they are registered to vote in the state of Washington, but they reside overseas? How do they get counted? They're not a current resident, but they use Washington as their home address for voting rights.
Well, we appreciate your questions, Mr. Bryan, and what I'd like to offer to you is please submit your questions in writing, and then I will respond to those in writing. So I'm very glad that you're speaking to us directly, because then it goes into the public record. And so both of those things, I would love to answer you, but it would just be as myself and off the hip. And so I'd rather do some due diligence and make sure that I give you a proper response that will be satisfying to you. So if you'd be willing to just send an email, then I'll be able to do the appropriate research and respond to you.
Right. And can you post that email somewhere or put it on the chat so I can get a quick copy of it?
Sure.
If there's a chat.
You bet. So Maria, if you could, I'm not sure if there is a chat, but it is on our redistricting website. So that information is always available, how to submit public comment.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. Thanks for being here. We appreciate hearing from you. The next person is Christopher Pond.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Welcome. We're glad you're here.
Hi. So I just had a quick suggestion. My name is Christopher Pond. I'm a digital cartographer, and I've been working on watershed boundaries to try to create districts out of watersheds, because it seems to me like that would be a really nonpartisan way to create districts. And my suggestion is that Washington State should maybe look into that, because it seems to me like a good idea. So.
Thank you, Mr. Pond. Is there more you would like to share with us?
No, that's it.
I appreciate your imaginative idea, and so I'll do my best to respond to that. What I typically do is sort of summarize our public comments, and to the extent that I'm able, I'll respond. Thank you. The next person is Clarence Gunn, and so welcome, Mr. Gunn. We're glad you're here.
Good evening, Madam Chair and Commissioners. My name is Clarence Gunn. I'm the President of Democrats for Diversity and Inclusion and the co-chair of the Coalition of Immigrants, Refugees, and Communities of Color. And I do a lot of work throughout Southeast Seattle and South King County trying to get more people involved and engaged in the political process, whether it's as PCOs or just in getting them registered to vote or those kinds of things. And last year, both of my organizations were involved with the census project, making sure that everyone filled out the form as much as we could. So that was encouraging to hear the results. And so now the next question really is about community engagement and involvement throughout the process. I noticed there are only like 21 people plus or minus here tonight. And I know you really haven't gotten started yet. So I was trying to get an idea of what the time span would be and thoughts regarding outreach and engagement, community events and activities, as well as opportunities to submit stuff. That's been pretty clear earlier this evening about submitting stuff to you and the website. But I was just trying to get a big picture of how we can get involved on that end in terms of community input and participation in the process. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And so I will say to the group here that we have the intention of creating a public outreach plan. Inclusion and transparency are key priorities for this commission that are voiced and we reiterate in every single meeting. So Mr. Gunn, as we have that plan, I'll be sure to reach out to you. If we'll be posting it on our website, but if you would like for me to respond to you directly, please do submit your request in writing at the address that's provided on the website, and I'll make sure that you're included specifically in that response. Thank you. All right, the next folks here are Jeffrey Olson and Melissa Taylor. So Mr. Olson, you're next if you're ready to speak. Welcome.
Okay. Let me get it back up so I can. The reason why I'm phoning is the last census did a mistake. It created an orphan precinct, and every member should do their best to prevent orphan precincts. What happened was the third was supposed to be totally inside the city. And when Dean Foster, who basically drew the map of Spokane, he didn't follow the city line totally, causing our county auditor to create a district of 12 acres, and it was designated Precinct 3000. That cost the counties more. It at first didn't have hardly anyone in it, but now it has 8 registered voters and about 13 for population. Now I am also a former district leader of the 9th district in Spokane, and we owed Dean Foster for what happened to the 9th. And what happened is that the 4 committee people brought out the map, and only one decided to slice up the 9th, and that was Dean Foster's map. And that's the reason, and the sole reason he was doing that was to include Cheney, the last surviving Democratic stronghold in the county. In 2000, there was 3 municipalities that voted Democrat.
I'm so sorry, Mr. Olson, that you were cut off. If you would please submit your comments to me by email, I'll make sure that that we read those and respond as we're appropriate. Thank you for being here. We're glad to hear from you. So the next speaker is Melissa Taylor.
Thank you, Commissioner Augustine, and thank you for your meeting this morning with Craig Bill, Director of the Governor's Office of Indian Affairs. Early engagement in a formal government-to-government process will allow us to do a better job of meeting our obligations to our Native neighbor. I am so proud of our nation-leading results of our census tribal outreach, which demonstrates what is possible when we do this well. Next, while the Commission as an entity cannot address the concerns around Commissioner Fain's presence on this committee, these concerns could still be addressed if he makes the decision to resign. Commissioner Fain, there was an opportunity in 2018 for you and your colleagues to do the right thing and allow the investigation that was opened into your alleged rape to proceed. You chose not to support that effort. That my tax dollars now pay you to hold this once-in-a-decade position of power and public trust to determine the political boundaries that will influence every aspect of my life for the next 10 years is so incredibly offensive to me and so many other survivors of sexual assault. Please resign.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor. We appreciate your being here and we appreciate your public testimony. Thank you. So I want to check in with Sean and Maria and just confirm that those are all the folks who that are in the meeting who signed up to testify. Is that correct?
That is
correct.
All right, terrific. So that closes our period of public testimony. Thank you. And so next, what I would like to do is turn to our action items. So we return to our Commission Code of Conduct. And what I'd like to do is begin with the draft Commission Code of Conduct. I provided a draft to the commissioners to review over the weekend. Today we've had an update to that draft from Council. So I apologize for issuing another draft at the late hour, and I appreciate your flexibility in being willing to review that. In the packet of materials is a draft document that was put together by staff under my supervision for the process we identified in our meeting on March 8th, and I hope that each of you have had the opportunity to review it. So I want to tell you that it was modified and modified language was sent out. And I want to tell you the specific modifications that were made. Dates were added to establish that this is the policy of the current 2021 Redistricting Commission. And also in Section A, application of policy, language was changed to clarify that caucus staff are not employees of the commission. So the new language in this section reads, this policy provides guidance that clarifies the standards of professional conduct and appropriate behavior for commissioners, employees of the commission, and staff of the legislature and legislative caucuses assigned to individual commissioners in their contacts and activities related to the work of the commission since January 27, 2021, the date on which the commission held its first meeting. So that's the revised text there. So first, I would like to hear your comments, and I'm going to go into days. Oh, sure. Go ahead, Commissioner Sims.
Yeah, I just wonder if we can clarify for folks who are looking at the documents online that the version that you're reading from is version 2, correct?
I am reading from version 2. So we did post both versions because one version went out earlier, and I did, rather than replace it, which would be confusing, I just posted 2, so you would be able to look at them side by side. I didn't want people who read it and reviewed it earlier to feel fooled by suddenly now we have a different draft. So they're both drafts are available there. And so I'm going to go in our order for today, beginning with Commissioner Walkinshaw. Do you have comments about the draft?
I do not. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner.
Terrific. And next is Commissioner Fain.
No comments.
Thank you. Commissioner Sims.
None from me. I'm happy with the document.
Great. Commissioner Graves.
My comment is that I think it's good and I think we should adopt it.
Terrific. So is there a motion to approve this code of conduct?
Move adoption of the code of conduct.
Terrific. Second?
Second.
Items for discussion or amendment? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? I believe that I heard an aye from everyone. I'm not sure I heard from you, Commissioner Walkinshaw, so you gave me a thumbs up. Okay, great. So the motion passes, and all right, terrific. We've adopted that. So next, what I'd like to do is move into our executive session. So RCW 4230.110 states in item G that a governing body is free to hold an executive session during a regular or special meeting to evaluate the qualifications of an applicant for public employment or to review the performance of a public employee. So each commissioner has had the opportunity to interview 2 finalists for the position of executive director. And I would now like to go into executive session to confer. We will resume the meeting in 20 minutes or earlier, but I think 20 minutes. So right now it is 8:26. So at 8:46, we will continue the meeting when we may announce additional time is needed for deliberation if necessary. So at this time, I would like to go to executive session. Great, terrific. Thanks everyone for your patience, and we are now back at the Washington State Redistricting Commission meeting, and I'm now asking the commissioners for a motion on hiring an executive director. Thank you for taking the time to confer, and I wonder if there is a motion among you.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I would move to offer employment to Lisa McLean for the position of Executive Director for the Washington State Redistricting Commission.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think we have had an extraordinary pool of applicants for this position. I was a little worried considering COVID, considering the some of the delays in getting the commission up and running as the legislative staff is working to find a way for folks to vote remotely and let alone get the commission up and running. I did not have the expectation that we were going to have so many extraordinary candidates. We had another candidate that we had the opportunity of interviewing this week, and he has an extraordinary resume and incredible experience and would have been a phenomenal choice. I'm excited to put Ms. McLean's name forward because of her deep experience in the very subject matter that we are talking about through this process, which is census data, and more importantly, the many relationships that she has with individuals within the administration and within the Census Bureau to be able to really hit the ground running. And so I'm hopeful that she will be look favorably upon this offer. I provide nothing but huge thanks to you for the incredible efforts over the last few weeks to run through all of those applicants that came through the door, and a great appreciation for all the staff support that you had as well. So appreciate it, and hope that we can have an executive director soon.
Thank you. Others, other comments for discussion? Commissioner Waukesha.
Just would echo some of the comments previously made, that I am really excited for the prospect of Ms. Lisa McLean joining as the executive director of this small agency as we kick off our work. It's a tall order to scale up and build something and then wind it down over the course of a year. And I think we were all very excited about her background working in a whole variety of foreign environments, in addition to the more recent work around the U.S. Census and work in engaging folks in Washington State. So I'm very excited about this and grateful to you, Commissioner Augustine, for helping pull together a fabulous process. I know it was enormously time consuming and we had a lot of extraordinary candidates in the mix, but would concur with my colleagues that I'm excited about the prospect of Lisa McLean, and I hope that she joins us in this important work over the course of the next year.
Thank you for your comment. Others? All right, so all in favor of making an offer to Lisa McLean?
Aye.
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 And opposed? All right, so the motion carries, and I will work to make an offer to her tomorrow. So thank you very much. And at this point, I'd like to adjourn the meeting. I want to thank you, commissioners, for your service and for your time and attention today and every day. And I want to give a thank you to staff members and members of the public who've taken the time to join us this evening. And I want to once again acknowledge that Sean Murray provided technical support, Maria Garza provided administrative support and took the minutes. I also want to acknowledge individual commission staff members who put effort into meeting commission requests and drafting documents, including Osta and Paul and Anton and Ali. Thank you. Thank you to Lisa from Legislative Support Services, HR. And thank you to AG Council, Emma, especially tonight for joining us and for your help with preparation. And this meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.
I think it was